Good morning. You can just carry on talking, but we're just going to wait for a fire alarm test, you see. I don't want to start the meeting and then fire alarm kicks in as well. Uh, Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Board. I hope you all have managed to have an enjoyable break of the summer. My name is Councillor Asghar Khan, and I will be chairing today's meeting. As usual, this meeting is webcast live on Leeds City Council YouTube channel. I welcome everyone watching through YouTube. I would like to take the moment to thank the leader of the council, Councillor James Lewis, for attending today. I know how busy you are, and you are always welcomed at scrutiny. So thank you for finding time today. And today it's your birthday, and we want to wish you a happy birthday. Before moving on to the agenda, We are well used to Mariana's excellent contribution to our meeting as the Director for Strategy and Resources. And she will be soon our new interim Chief Executive of Leeds City Council. So congratulations, Mariana, on becoming the first female Chief Executive in the history of our city, and we wish you all the best in the new role. And also I'd like to wish Tom on his new role in the Department of Health and Social Care. Today we will consider the latest financial position for the Council. Looking at the Month 4 Financial Health Monitoring Report, like our finance paper from July, this is considered by Executive Board on Wednesday. So once again, thank you, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Lewis, for giving us early sight of the latest information on our budget. We have an update paper from Electoral Services covering the election in May and July. We know you have had a busy year, so thank you for providing this update. We will also have colleagues from licensing with us to consider the budget and policy framework item on the Gambling Act. And lastly, we have the Leeds Joint Strategy Assessment, so a busy agenda ahead of us. I would like to invite attendees to formally introduce themselves. I will go around the room on my left to introduce, and guests are also welcome to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Andy Parnham, and I represent Armley Ward.
Councillor Tom Hinchcliffe, Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Morning, Councillor Craig Timmins, Carvely and Farsley.
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Guiseley and Rawdon Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Moortown, Meanwood Ward.
Good morning, everyone. John Mulcahy, Chief Officer, Elections and Regulatory.
Good morning, I'm Susie Benton and I'm Head of Electoral Services.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Richard Ellis, the Deputy Chief Officer for Financial Services.
Good morning, Councillor James Lewis, Leader of the Council, and I'd like to know the votes for and against wishing me a happy birthday from this board. Thank you.
Good morning, Mariana Paxton, Director of Strategy and Resources, and thank you for the kind comments and support I've had in this last couple of weeks.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Deborah Cooper, Exec Board Member for Resources.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Dan Cohen from the Woodley Ward here today, substituting for my colleague, Councillor Andrew Carter. And Councillor Lewis, you'll be delighted to know it was a rare example of unanimity.
Morning all, Councillor Ed Carlisle for Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Morning, Councillor Winkage, you're representing Morley South.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Diane Chapman, representing Rothwell Ward.
Good morning, Billy Flynn, Councillor for Adlam Wharfdale Ward.
Morning, everyone. Rob Clayton, I'm the Principal Scrutiny Advisor to the Board. And just briefly, Chair, if you don't mind, just for members in the room, the webcast is unaffected. I know the screen is different, but just to highlight that the webcast will be the same as standard, but the internal monitors are different in terms of their display.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for the introduction. Moving on to agenda then, can I ask Rob to go through the first 5 items of the business, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Khan. Yes, just the standard items of business that we take at each board meeting. So item 1 is appeals, and there are no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents today. Item 2 is exclusion of the public, and there are no items for exclusion, Chair. Item 3 is late items. Now, there are no formal late items, but members will be aware that there was a supplementary pack that was shared last week, which associated to Councillor Khan's comments around the exec board agenda. So, due to the publication deadlines, that was a supplementary item. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Chair, and I will just briefly pause to allow any members to speak.
Yeah, just in terms of item 9, the Gambling Act 2005, just to say I'm trustee of a charity and chair that has a small society registration, but I don't consider it to have any impact on my participation.
Thank you, Councillor Timmins, and I'll note that in the minutes as would be standard practice. Thank you. And then item 5, Chair, is apologies, and we have apologies from Councillor Andrew Carter with Councillor Cohen subbing, and we also have apologies from Councillor Pauline Graham. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. So item 6 is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 22nd of July 2024. Do members accept these minutes are true and correct record? Yep. And I'll go page by page as well for matter rising. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12, page 13, page 14, and page 15. Are there any matter rising from the minutes? Nope. Thank you. Rob, do you have any items to pick up, please?
Yes, just two brief ones, Chair. Minute 19, some additional financial information was shared with board members relating to our finance update from July. So that was sent last week, so you should all have received that. And minute 22, just on the work programme, Councillor Timmins raised the issue of employee date changes, payment date changes. So that is something that, in conjunction with the exec member, we will pick up and sort that, and the chair, and we'll get some timescales to put that into the work programme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, we will move to agenda item 7, page 17 of the supplementary pack, which looks at our budget for the current financial year, which unfortunately highlights our ongoing financial challenge. I know everyone is working really hard to innovative and find savings, so thank you to officers in finance and across the council for their efforts. We have a presentation for this item which we'll run through before making questions and comments from board members. I will hand it over to Richard now.
Thank you, Chair. So we've got a short presentation just in terms of the key issues with regard to the financial health report, which are being considered today and also is being tabled and received at Executive Board on Wednesday of this week. So just in terms of the overall reported position, if you just want to take the slides on a couple, Rob, thank you. So in terms of the position being reported today, being reported on a overspend of £22.2 million, so that's an increase from the £19.9 million that was reported to Executive Board in July and also received at this Scrutiny Board as well. In terms of the key variations within that, as you can see from the bar chart, is that adults and health are projecting a £7.9 million overspend. Children and families are projecting 18.8. Both city development and community housing environments are balanced, and strategy and resources projecting a £2.9 million overspend. The strategic position is showing a £7.5 million underspend, but that's largely due to a contribution from the social care contingency reserve to help offset some of the pressures we're seeing within social care, within children's and within adults. So if you want to move, thank you. In terms of the budget action plan, just to remind members, when the budget was approved in February of this year, the 24-25 budget, there was £63.9 million of directorate savings to be delivered. And during the course of this financial year, given some of the pressures to be outlined, is a further £19.3 million of action savings have been identified since. At month 4, most of these are anticipated to be delivered in full or have mitigating actions, but there is an overall shortfall in terms of the original list of savings plus the additional savings of about £6.9 million, and that's reflected in the directorate positions being reported as part of this report. So just picking up some of the sort of key issues to consider with regard to those reported pressures within adults and health, there's a pressure of £7.9 million. £15.9 million contained within that relates to demand-led pressures, and that's reduced by savings of £3.5 million in staffing, £0.7 million in running costs, and additional client income of £3.8 million. Also, other areas to consider as part of that is a projected overspend in terms of agency and overtime of £4 million. Overspend in terms of transport of 0.8, but there's offsetting some of that is £3.5 million underspend on pay. Now, just in terms of the graph we've got there, and there's several graphs contained within the report. Just contained in the report is that the number, just demand pressures that we've got there. What we've just tried to show is just the numbers. So you can see in terms of the purple line there is the 3,475 people in residential and nursing placements, and that compares against previous financial years, going back to 2021. And I've also put the budgeted line in there as well. So I think what this graph is just trying to show you is just the demand pressures that we've got within the adults and health service. Thank you, Rob. In terms of children and families, there's the month 4 forecast shows projected overspend about £18.8 million. Children looked after a variation of £12 million from budgeted assumptions, and the transport costs associated with children is further £3.7 million. Contained within that position, there's savings of £4.7 million in terms of CLA numbers, and that's clearly based on timescales for delivery and also the care planning needs for the individual children. In terms of taking account of this position, the £22.2 million, there's a number of requirements and key messages gone out to all members of staff. So no spend is to be incurred unless critical for service delivery, and contained within that is that there should be no travel unless within exceptional circumstances. There's tighter control in terms of purchasing cars, and in many cases purchased cars have been zeroised, so budget holders can't spend on them. There's a complete recruitment freeze. There's some exceptions within that, some statutory requirement, things like social care roles, and there's a much tighter control now in terms of utilisation of agency staff and overtime. Moving away from the general fund, the housing revenue account is projecting a balanced budget position at period 4, and in terms of the dedicated school grant, there are in-year pressures of £9.5 million, largely within the high needs block. That's about £1.7 million of total funding. And as a result of that overspend is that DSG reserves will be negative reserves, and there's a projected deficit of £7 million at the end of the current financial year. And finally, just in terms of collection rates for council tax and business rates, in terms of council tax, the in-year position is 35.29%, slightly down from July last year, 35.65%, and down from the last pre-COVID position of 36.91%. In terms of business, so in terms of council tax, this is just the in-year position, but in the fullness of time, we'd expect to collect 99% of the total council tax due. In terms of business rates, the current collection rate is 38.88%, which compares favourably with 12 months ago, but again is still behind where we were pre-COVID in the last full year there, July 2019. And Thank you, Chair. Members got any questions, and I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for your comprehensive presentation and report. And before I open to the board, can I ask Councillor Cooper or Councillor Lewis if you want to add any comments?
Thank you, Chair. I would just say that we are currently finding ourselves in unprecedented financial within the council, not just the in-year pressures, but around setting the budget for next year. That's proving very challenging for us at the minute. Mainly due to the last 14 years of government funding that we have not received enough to for us to be able to deliver the services that we've needed to deliver. There has also been unprecedented demand in social care needs, so in children's and in adults as well. We're starting to see that those numbers rising, and it makes it extremely difficult then for us to forecast the amount of finances needed to cover all those services. So we're seeing these in-year pressures come through because the numbers are increasing. Particularly in children's, it seems to be that it's the external placements that are very, very costly. And, excuse me, it's the private providers, the market in children's provision, residential provision, is driven a lot by the private providers, and they are profiteering at the unfortunately, at the behest of our children. So that you can see the cost ramping up and up as we've gone through last year and this year in terms of those costs. As you heard Richard say, we have got action plans in place to be able to try and bring those figures down somewhat during the year. And we are in month 4, what is a 12-month period. So this is forecasting for the end of the year as clearly and openly and transparently as we can do. Thanks, Chair. I'll leave it for questions now.
Mariana?
At risk of being predictable, Chair, if I can just add, because often Councillor Cooper does say this, we're not alone in these circumstances, and I know everybody knows that, but it is probably important to just recognise that, you know, our kind of near neighbours, you know, core cities, a lot of other, you know, councils right across the country are struggling both on an in-year position and also on a kind of forward-looking position. So just feels important to mention that in terms of context. And for very, very, very similar reasons, largely. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper and Mariana. So now, any comments or questions from the board members, please? Councillor Carlisle.
Thank you all. Just two questions, not particularly related. One of them is, so what are national governments saying about possible changes? Is there going to be any relief coming anytime soon that they're talking about? And or are core cities looking to speak up together about this? I mean, obviously national government know it, but it's just, if it hasn't really happened, and sorry if I missed it, it'd be worthwhile us and similar cities surely just speaking up and making sure that, I think people maybe assume that there's a new national government, so surely everything's different now. That's clearly not the case. And then the other question was, I suppose I'm just, I'm really interested in how we can try to communicate as a council, how we communicate in such a way that actually we can start to shift, and it's how we can start to shift culture in the city around people in communities taking more action, which is the huge untapped resource that could be a huge sea change. So one example would be, you know, communities kind of stepping up to kind of deal with some of the trees that have fallen down, which in a small way, took the pressure off the forestry team. And the more we can mobilise that not even the third sector, but just mobilise communities to take action, that, at least in the medium to long term, could be the huge game changer for saving huge amounts of money.
Councillor Lewis.
Thanks. So, I mean, the answer from government at the moment is there's going to be a budget on October the 30th, which we're all very excited for. In terms of representations, we, as members know, we're members of the Local Government Association, and they put in their submission to the budget and spending review, setting out the position that local councils are in, the scale of the challenge we have, and I think it's worth. I think it's worth reflecting some of the issues that are in the presentation that Richard made aren't around, and it's a point Mariana made, that they're not around. They're not around an inability to forecast or an inability to manage a budget. It is particularly in adult social care and children's social care around the demand that we face at the moment. These aren't budgets that we can turn off during the year because we've reached a spending limit. And I think there needs to be recognition, first of all, of our, like I say, our almost a unique position we have in government of having to manage complex demand budgets that, like I say, we can't turn off during the year, and having to do that in the overall context of having to legally balance a budget across the year in advance. So in effect we're almost bringing forward initial budget proposals in December that are required to be balanced almost 15 months after we have issued them. So there are some there is a strong case to be made by, like I say, the cross-party Local Government Association, and I think we're all look forward to see what's in the budget on the 30th of October.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Cooper.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Lewis, for letting us know the conversations with the government at the moment. I think on Councillor Carlisle's second point, in terms of shifting the culture in Leeds, well, I don't think it needs shifting, because I think Leeds does do team lead really well. And we've shown over many, many years how, when there is things that need to be dealt with in the community, that we come together and we do it. You look back at the floods in Kirkstall and what happened. Communities came out from all over Leeds to help another community in Kirkstall. What happened during COVID? We had 8,000 volunteers out helping people who couldn't get out to the shops, who couldn't get to the chemists, who couldn't do all of those things because they were isolating or had to be keep at home. We've still got so many volunteers in this city that we are extremely grateful to for all the work that they do in all of our communities, whether that be the In Bloom groups that make communities look and feel better places for us all to be in, or whether that be the Wombles, for instance, who are out collecting litter. And I know many of the elected members are involved in those groups within their own communities as well. So I don't think, Chair, that we need to change the culture of our city one bit.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Richard, do you want to come in?
I just think supporting Councillor Lewis, really, just in terms of the budget on October 30th will be key, because not considering today, but the medium-term financial strategy is also going to Executive Board in September, and many of the assumptions there around council tax, revenue support grant, are really just roll forward figures from previous years, because we haven't got that detail as to what the government spending plans are going to be. So clearly that is going to be critical, and just to assure scrutiny is that we are making representations. So we do it through core cities. We're also doing it through Sagoma as well, and also directly back to MHCLG as well. So through a number of channels we're making representations back with regard to the sort of financial position, the pressures being faced, but also some of the opportunities as well that could be taken. Thank you.
Councillor Flynn.
Thanks very much indeed. It's not really for Richard, I don't think, and Debbie and Mariana are fully aware. I think it's really a request for areas that we've been asked to highlight future areas of work for future scrutiny boards. At the moment, the current month, 2 of our directors, Adult Health, Children and Families, the total forecast of an overspend is 27 million. There's a high risk of us not achieving the medium-term financial strategy with £106 million debit or gap forecast for next year. And I'd really like more information on the service reviews and budget action plans in the current year, obviously, in particular with those 2 directorates. It's not a criticism, it's just a request for further information for this board to have a look at, because it's a struggle really to see how we're going to get out of this without having a bit more information. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper or Mariana, do you want to respond? Mariana.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Flynn. Yeah, I mean, we recognise the real extreme challenges that those 2 service areas face. Andy Hodson and colleagues have been working on options around, consideration of financial information at scrutiny alongside performance information, and we'll be writing to chairs soon about the suggested approach to that. In the meantime, if this board really want to have a look at that and invite Caroline and Julie, then I get, that's for Rob to kind of fix, as long as the chair of this board is also happy.
Thank you, Mariana. Next, I've got Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. I just want to go back to what Councillor Carlisle mentioned about shifting communities. I agree. I think we have got a fantastic set of volunteer groups across the city, but I do think we could make it easier for new groups to set up and do things. I'm thinking parks. There's lots of work that can be done in parks. That I know there's the Friends of group, but we don't all have them, or they're not active. And also community buildings, where I think communities would come together and help maintain or restore buildings with a little bit of more proactive help from us. The will's there, it's just not always easy to access it, that's all.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Chapman, for the question. And I do know from my previous portfolio holdings how well that parks do for volunteers. They have a volunteer programme, and they literally have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers in parks already. And I recognise what you're saying about maybe setting groups up, how easy or not it may be, Councillor Chapman, and I just wonder whether that might well be for another scrutiny board and not particularly for the resources. But I just wanted to say from my own knowledge of how well parks do for volunteers, I have to say.
Thank you.
So I accept it may well be more appropriate to another board, but as an example, I'm part of a group that's been working in Rothwell Park. There's only 6 of us. We've asked for help. I'm also an active member of a couple of community groups, and we've asked for help with storage. And we've been told it's inappropriate for us to have access to the depot in Rothwell Park to store our kit, which isn't helping community groups do the work they need. It means we all have to be there at the same time with each other. We can't just go as 1 or 2 people. All I'm saying is there is a little bit of bureaucracy that we could cut through to make this a little bit easier and access support that we need as a city, because we can't afford to do it as a council. There are bits, I'm sure we're all aware of areas that are frustrating to us and to our residents, where we could just make things a little bit easier if we could cut through some bureaucracy. That's all.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I would just repeat that I think this is the business of another scrutiny board. But I know in my ward, say for instance in Temple Newsham, that local councillors have used our mice allocation to help groups like that with storage containers. Maybe that's something you can take away, Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. I've got Councillor Timmins.
Just in 2 parts from me. The first one, I actually feel quite strongly about this. So the cost of children cared for in external settings is incredibly high. I think we're doing some good work on bringing about children's homes. And I think given the impact on the well-being of the children in these settings, and in terms of what it could save us council financially, I would encourage members across the board not to be blockers to these, but to reassure residents that they can be a good thing and that the negative impacts of them are rare. And the second bit, just going to the budget action plans. So, and Appendix 4 on the supplement that was sent out. So just a couple of bits that I want to raise from that. So under adults and health, one of the high risk areas, invest to save proposals for deputy and appointeeship team. The ombudsman decision means unable to charge, and I'm just wondering if we could have foreseen that. And also on that one of the sections that's at some risk, Newton Europe Home First programme, but it doesn't give us any detail about that, and you know it's quite a lot of money. And then kind of touching on what Councillor Flynn said, just in terms of the budget action plans for children and families, just the actions for the reds and ambers, they're quite vague, going down, so a lot of plans to be developed, working on a plan, and I was just kind of wondering when we could expect to see what those plans are.
Thanks, Councillor Simmons. I'll try and go through all of those. Appreciate the comment about residential homes. It is a really important part of our strategy. It's another one that lots of councils are doing, which is resulting in delays, unfortunately, through Ofsted registration. But I think anything that the Directorate and members can do to enable that, all the better in terms of those getting open as soon as possible, and getting some of those children and young people transferred. In terms of the two things on adults and health, I suspect we couldn't have seen it in terms of foreseeing the ombudsman issue, because probably we were contingent on waiting for the outcome of an ombudsman inquiry. We may have made different assumptions, but we'll have to take that away and have a look at the detail. I don't know without having a look at it, but there is a good chance we couldn't have foreseen it. On the Newton Europe and the Home First, that's one where at the moment the savings from Home First are overachieving those expectations, and they are offsetting where we've got demands and additional pressures in other areas. But again, it's a very, very, very significant change programme, the Home First, so it needs to run for longer to be sure that those savings can continue to be sustained. And then the comment about vagueness on children and families, I hadn't picked up that they were vague in this version, I must admit, and I'm surprised Councillor Cooper hasn't either, because we have been really, really focused on children and families, and we'll take that feedback away. Everybody in the Directorate and lots of support service colleagues are all working incredibly hard to try and get things as sharp as possible, and with really smart objectives, time focused, and really holding each other to account in terms of the delivery on that. So we'll reflect back on that drafting and see if we can learn anything from that. But suffice to say, the pressure is absolutely still on. And if Julie were to be here and Caroline were to be here at a future meeting, they would equally give you that assurance that we're doing everything that we possibly can.
Thank you, Mariana. Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, just to add to what Mariana has said, that that work across council is going on to try and help and support in both children's and adults in terms of bringing that in-year pressure down, and also for future for the next 3 years as well, in terms of bringing the spend down over the next 3 years as well. There is also a Children and Families Oversight Board that meets that I attend and go through in a lot of detail, line by line, on children and families, and with other directors that come to that meeting as well, to try and help and support in some of the areas that may need some other input from other directors as well. So all that work, I would like to reassure scrutiny members, is being undertaken. And so I am sorry if we've left it a bit vague in the financial reporting. We'll make sure that doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Just to add from Councillor Cooper, following our discussion at the last meeting, our scrutiny members working group has been set up, and it's in our diaries actually on the 25th of September at 4:30 p.m. This will provide more details on the budget plan for 2025-2026 as part of our usual scrutiny work on the budget. Yeah. Any more questions? Councillor Coyne?
Thank you, Chair. It's more of a mini comment, just to assure, of course, that the Children and Family Scrutiny Board also look with laser-like precision at the children and families aspect of the budget, and I can assure you we will be certainly picking up some of the points you've raised.
Thank you, Councillor Coyne. My question, I've got one question as well. Are we still prioritising the reserves and adding to them each year and set out in the medium-term financial strategy?
That's correct, Chair. Yeah, the medium-term financial strategy. There's as set out in this report, there's a £1.5 million in-year contribution to the general reserve, and then moving forward, there's £3 million built in each year as a contribution as well. And that's in response to make sure that the local authority remains financially sustainable and resilient moving forward, and also it addresses some of the concerns by Grant Thornton, our auditors, as well, about the level of reserves that we hold. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Are there any more questions or comments from the board? No? Thank you. The recommendations are on page 17 of our agenda pack. Are we happy to approve? Yep. Thank you. And before we move to item 8 on page 21, by the way, can I thank Councillor Thompson for bringing the biscuits for this morning for Councillor Lewis' birthday. So please feel free to help yourself anyway with those biscuits. So which is now a report on the electoral services, providing an update on their work on their 2 elections we had earlier this year. We have a presentation to support this item. Over to you, Susie.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, the slides we will just display as we're going through the presentation. So it's an update on the outcomes from the local and combined authority mayoral elections that were held on the 2nd of May this year, and the parliamentary election held. First of all, looking at methods of voting, we've previously reported a shift in the voting method as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw pre-pandemic voting methods of around 67% of electors voting in a polling station and 33% voting by post completely turn on its head. So that in 2021, the first elections we had under COVID, there were 64% of electors voting by post and 36% in a polling station. So this has gradually been levelling out now since 2021. The postal voting numbers are going down. So if we look at the first slide on the screen, you will see that the orange line has started to creep up again for in-person voting. And for the general election, completely overtook postal voting, which was expected because you do get a lot of people turning out that don't usually for other elections. So we had just under 57% of those electors who voted doing so in person. It's important for us as a service to note the changes in voting methods to ensure we provide adequate numbers of polling stations throughout the city if the in-person voting starts to go back up again for local elections, and reflect the expected in-person turnout, and that those stations are sufficiently staffed and located in sufficient locations as well. People with postal votes are more likely to vote than those who vote in person, and the turnout for postal votes is significantly higher than the overall turnout at each election. So in May 2024, 64.5% of postal voters used their postal vote and returned those, and for the general election that rose to 78.41% of postal voters sending their packs back. For postal vote rejection rates then, we've reported previously on the rejection rates of postal votes for the last 4 years now and continue to work to reduce the number of postal votes rejected as far as we can. Rejection reasons include things like signatures not matching their applications or not being provided, incorrect dates of birth being entered on the security statements, lack of understanding on how to complete and return their packs, and electors where more than one person in the household votes by post, getting their documents mixed up and then sending each other's back, which leads to rejection. So the second slide shows the level of rejections from 2021 to present. There is a slight increase for May 2024, which is largely attributed to the combination of polls on that date. When we have 2 ballot papers in a postal vote pack, traditionally you do see that more electors get confused with what to do with all the documents they've received. You can find that they post their ballot papers back separately to their postal voting statements, so they'll use the envelopes we've given them to post one of the documents back, and then they send the others back separately, which can take longer because they don't have that priority postage, and then unfortunately they're not able to be matched up before the close of poll. Moving on to voter ID then, the number of electors unable to vote due to the requirement to show ID in a polling station was introduced in May 2023, and it continues to fall in Leeds, which is testament to the comms campaign and the hard work that the comms team have put in, particularly with targeted work in areas where we've had higher levels of ballot paper refusal when the measure was introduced. So the final slide shows a clear improvement with 225 electors unable to vote in a polling station in May 23. That went down to 160 in May 24 and just 88 in July 2024. When you think about the increase in turnout for July, that's a really good achievement. The Electoral Commission published their report on voter ID last week and recommended several measures to improve the process of voter ID, which we support. And this should help to reduce further the number of electors unable to vote. So these are increasing awareness and increasing the uptake of the free voter ID that we can provide for people, which is still really undersubscribed. And so they're doing work to make that more widely known about and accessible. And that'll include extending the deadline to closer to polling day for people to be able to apply for that. Also adding to the list of accepted ID that people can show in polling stations to include with things we hope like other travel cards other than the ones that are on the list at the moment, and things like the veterans card. And finally, to introduce an attestation process on polling day where a trusted person would be able to vouch for the identity of an individual if they've not been able to obtain the required ID by polling day. Finally, then, the requirement for existing postal voters to reapply. So electors registered for a postal vote prior to 31st of October 23, which is most of our postal voters, about 165,000, will need to reapply under the new system, which now includes an identity check at the application stage and brings it in line with the ID checks that take place in polling stations. Postal voters will only be able to have a postal vote in place for a maximum of 3 years, at which point they'll be contacted and advised that if they don't reapply, then their postal voting arrangement will expire. During the fallow year next year, we will write to these 165,000 electors, make them aware of the requirement to reapply. Luckily, we do now have online postal vote applications, so this will make the process much easier for people, but they can also apply by paper, and we will support the people that need help to do this process. The cost of doing that is fully funded by the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. And that's the end of my presentation, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Susan. John, before I open to the board members, do you want to comment, or are you?
Thanks, Chair. I think the only thing I'd like to comment on is there's a lot of statistical information in what Susie said there. There's also a lot of hard work, blood, sweat and tears that the elections team put in to the elections, and having been through the West Yorkshire and a general election all in the same year. I think it'd be worthwhile if we just take a moment to reflect on that and the amount of work that the team have put in this year in particular. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. I'll open to the board members now. Any questions? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. A huge thank you to Electoral Services. You've done an incredible job under a lot of pressure. And we've been really impressed with the work that's been done. Just a couple of brief questions. Firstly, are you able to give us an idea of how many people applied for the free voter ID? And also, one thing I don't think was mentioned, I appreciate it's not the easiest thing to measure. Do we know what the impact has been of the change in rules about dropping off postal votes on election day in terms of who and how many? Thank you.
Thank you. So in Leeds, we've had, I think, since voter ID was introduced, about 2,000 applications for a voter authority certificate. And then from those that applied, I think about 500 of them were actually used in polling stations as ID on polling day. So not a great uptake, and then not great usage of them either, which is disappointing. Your second question, is that relating to people that whose postal votes have expired because of the new process?
No, about the change in that there would limit of how many postal ballots could be dropped off at a polling station or elsewhere.
Right, okay. The information on the postal voting handling rules is not in the public domain, so we can't share. Basically, the forms that record that information go into sealed packets at the end of polling day in the polling station and can only be opened in an election court. So that information's not available to us. I do know we did monitor the stats before those rules came in to see what we thought, where there might be problems, but it was really minimal in terms of people handing in more than the limit that had been set at 6. So we don't think there would have been a big impact in that, and we didn't have any problems reported from polling stations.
Thank you, Susan. I've got Councillor Coyne next, and then Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, it was Councillor Thompson made part of my point, which was just a huge thank you to all of the elections team. I'm constantly impressed at the good nature that they show all of us, and some of our ridiculous questions that we all managed to ask in blind panic at election times. They are, and I say this, the most patient of teams, and how you put up with us all around election time never ceases to amaze me. Do we have any data around whether any parts of the city were impacted more significantly in terms of voters who turned up without the correct identification and then didn't come back? The curse of subbing is I might not have read it as in the usual depth and missed that. And the classy thing to do would have not been to mention it.
Yeah, so I will just say it is in the table, Councillor, but yes, we do look at that now. It's very small type. Yeah, we do look at that from election to election, identify any wards or particular areas that we think there has been a problem, and then we work with the comms team to make sure that we get the messaging out to people and the support that's needed, whether that be putting things up in the area in community groups or even having additional support in the one-stops around there. But we have seen a significant improvement where we've put those measures in place.
Can I apologise for not seeing that table? It's quite clearly there, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Coyne. Next I've got on the list is Councillor Palmer.
I'm hoping I don't fall foul of the Councillor Coyne curse, because with 260 pages, I may have missed this. It's not a curse, obviously not a curse. But I was just going to ask, Susanna, many thanks for your report, and obviously I echo the other councillors' sentiments about all the hard work that the team do throughout the year. And also note there's another by-election coming up very shortly. On our door knocking rounds, we come across people, and one or two in Armley Ward have said, "Oh, I'm not going out this time because it's too far," you know. And I'm just wondering, I'm guessing there's a downward curve on the number of polling stations. Is that planned to continue into future years? And also, is there a statutory number of polling stations in each ward, or what's the legislation regarding that, please?
So yes, we did see a reduction, and particularly after COVID, when we stopped using porta cabins, I think we lost about 15 polling stations across the city, where some were merged, and then with the new accessibility rules we couldn't go back to portable buildings, so those arrangements have remained. There is no intention to reduce further, and in fact, as we see people dropping off the postal voting register, it may be that we have to start looking at putting additional stations in if we need to. In terms of limits, it's based on the electorate. You need to have a polling station for each 2,250 electors. So, and that does work out. If we have a location where more than that go, then we do a split station, so a double station within a building. But we do have this sufficient number of stations at the moment. But like I said in my presentation, we keep an eye on the voting methods so that we know that we can supply adequate numbers of stations for electors. But please, if there's any area in particular that you think that there might be an issue with, just raise that with us and we'll have a look at that.
And just to follow up very briefly, are all those additional costs, are those costs you're talking about the policy, are they all covered by central government?
The costs for the postal vote right out under the new rules is funded by local government, but not additional stations, unless it was a national election, and then they would pay just for that particular one.
Thank you. Next on the list is Councillor Carlisle.
Yeah, and I also just want to echo what everyone else has said, which is you're brilliant, so thank you. Just a couple of things. You said it very quickly, I might have missed it. Did you say there's going to be some process where people who don't have ID can be vouched for? And I'd be interested to hear more about that. I wondered, unless I completely got this wrong, we have the highest postal voter percentage in the country, and I wonder why that is, and if there was a particular strategy we did. And also, I mean, we were talking about this just in the pre-meeting, and maybe it's impossible to really get to the bottom of, but like that there are always people who I trust, people who aren't just disorganised and have lost stuff, who say, well, I'm a postal voter and I didn't get it, and I didn't kind of think to raise it until the last minute. Quite often they get in contact about the day before the election and they say, well, I still haven't got my postal vote ballot. And it's impossible for us to know what those numbers are, because presumably for the most part they're just people who just they're lost within that body of people who postal voters who didn't vote. But is there any way to try to understand what's happening there and to try to hold probably the Royal Mail to account? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so the first thing in terms of attestation and vouching as a way of IDing polling stations is currently just an EC Electoral Commission recommendation, so that's what they would like to see. And it's similar to attestations that are in place for other registration procedures currently, like if people can't provide the sufficient ID, say, for their postal vote application, we would try every avenue possible to the point where we had to get somebody to vouch for them, but that just doesn't extend at the moment to voter ID in polling stations. So their recommendation would be to put that in place. We would support that, and we'll just have to see where that goes, because it would be a government decision to bring that in. Yes, we do have the highest number of postal voters in the country. We did a write-out in February 2021 to anyone that wasn't registered for a postal vote because of COVID, making them aware of the facility, sending them a form and offering the chance to do that. And we went from 88,000 postal voters to 215,000 postal voters, which was something that other authorities did, but it was really highly subscribed in Leeds, and has remained a legacy, which is dropping down. We're at about 176,000 now, so it is going down, and we expect it to further decrease when we do this right out. I think some people will think, actually, I'm not really bothered for it anymore, and we'll return to the polling station. Postal votes not received. This is something now that is being looked at nationally by government, by the Electoral Commission, by the Association of Electoral Administrators, working with Royal Mail to see what they can do to improve the levels of service that we do receive. I have to say that there's been some work going on, and for the general election it did improve, and we actually saw the lowest number of applications for reissues for elections for a number of years, not just a general election, for any election, which to say we achieved that at a general election is a really positive thing, but there's definitely improvements that need to be made, and we'll just continue to work with partners to try and make the improvements where we can.
Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, first of all, I'd give my thanks as well to the team. They are brilliant, and I do ask staff questions frequently. And Councillor Carlisle's actually covered most of what I was going to raise about the postal votes not necessarily arriving on time. But we had a similar issue with the mayoral packs, where they arrived significantly, well, some of them arrived after the election. A lot arrived a long time after the postal votes arrived. So people, and we all know that people with postal votes tend to vote quite quickly when they land on the mat. So I just wondered if there was anything else that can be done with the Royal Mail, because I presume it was their problem, not ours, to ensure that that sort of material does arrive in a timely fashion.
Yeah, we are aware there was an isolated number of it's the booklet, isn't it, that you're referring to for the mayoral election. So from the millions that we sent out across the whole West Yorkshire area, there were pockets, which there are with any postal deliveries of that scale, that took longer. And yes, some did arrive either a couple of days before polling day, on polling day itself, and after polling day. We did take this up with Royal Mail, and obviously you get a kind of standard response from Royal Mail in terms of these things, that it's a large mailing, we do what we can. They checked everything and it was clear at the time, and then they were found. I'm not really sure what we can do to improve their service, but this is why it is a known fact that the service is not satisfactory for electoral mailings, and it's something that we continue to push with government and other organisations that are involved in elections. And I think we did do a comprehensive reply about the issue with the booklets, Council, that I can share if you'd like to see a copy of that.
Thank you. How much additional resources will be needed to complete postal vote re-election application, if any?
Fortunately for us, it will be done during the fallow year, so we'll be able to absorb that within the team.
Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Thank you very much. It's almost like we should have never privatised Royal Mail in the first place. Got a couple of questions about proxy voting. I don't know if you've built that into your data in a way that, because I don't think there's much mention of it in the report. I don't know if that's built into in-person voting or postal. And the second point is just that we've all raised before. I'm sure we've all knocked on doors where people say, well, I'm not going to vote because I ain't got any ID, and that's completely impossible to monitor, but therein lies the problem with voter ID. But just a main question about proxies, please.
Yes, so proxy statistics will be included in the in-person voting category, but we only ever have about 200 to 300 proxy arrangements in place, so it's really minimal anyway. But yes, if the proxy goes to the station to vote in person, that would just be classed as in person.
Thank you. There's no more questions from the board. Before I close this item, can I ask Councillor Cooper or Councillor Lewis to make any comment on this item, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Scrutiny Board members for thanking the team at the Electoral Services, because the sheer amount of work that they undertake in the short period of time that they have to do it in is clearly remarkable, and clearly all of you are grateful for that as well. So yes, it just leaves me to add my thanks to Susie, John and the team. Will you please take them back to the team so they all get an understanding of how much they are appreciated, and we'll continue working to improve things as always. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And on behalf of the board, we would like to say a huge thank you to your team for running, the local and the mayoral and the general election smoothly. Just pass our thanks and appreciation to your team as well, please. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. Are we happy with the report and the recommendation on page 21? Yep. Thank you. We now move to agenda item 9, page 31, which is the budget and policy framework item, where we are asked to provide our views on the statement of licensing policy on the gambling as part of the decision-making process set out in the Constitution. John and Sue, are you introducing?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the three-yearly review of the Gambling Act 2005 Statement of Licensing Policy. This is a statutory requirement and follows the budget and policy framework and is automatically presented to scrutiny as part of that process. So members may be aware that there has been a national review of the Gambling Act over the past few years undertaken by the government. The government has received recommendations in a white paper and have undertaken a number of theme consultations at the end of last year and through this year. The outcome of these have been published by the DCMS, but unfortunately any statutory changes were halted on account of the election. Because of this imminent change to the Gambling Act, the Gambling Commission, who are the national regulator of gambling, has suggested to local authorities that they undertake a brief review of their policies with a more thorough review to be undertaken next year when the new changes are put in place. As members will recall, the Council takes a whole council approach to gambling harm, and we have a cross-department group that undertakes this work, including officers from public health, financial inclusion and entertainment licensing. And this is a long-winded way of me trying to say to you that these officers have reviewed the gambling policy with a view to take a brief review as recommended by the Gambling Commission. However, we realised that some of the wording in our policy was out of step with current thinking, specifically around the framing of gambling addiction. Therefore, we realised that the brief review that we'd planned wasn't possible. And so we undertook a thorough review and steps were also put in place to future-proof the policy in the hope that we won't have to be back here in 12 months' time. So the main changes to the policy are detailed in pages 105 to 110 of your pack. But briefly, we updated the population figures and other statistics, updated the section on integration with guidance and policies and so on. This is the standard amendment we undertake at each policy review. We replaced the term problem gambling with gambling harm, in line with the Council's approach that gambling harm is a public health issue. We provided updated statistics on the prevalence of gambling harm and provided more information on the Council approach. We removed 2 of the appendices as these are likely to be altered by the changes to land-based gambling next year and are duplicated in the legislation, so not necessary in the policy. These changes were consulted upon with all gambling licence holders and with members of the public through ward members, members of Parliament and support groups. We welcome responses to the consultation. It's really important because this tests the policy and provides a level of robustness. We received 3 responses and these are provided at page 97 onwards in your pack. One from GamCare appears to be a generic response. You've got to bear in mind that these organisations will receive a notification of about 400 policy reviews in this year. Because of the way the Gambling Act is written, everybody reviews their policy in the same year. It's a big issue for these organisations. So the one from GamCare appears to be a generic response and we're broadly in agreement with their comments, and in fact a lot of the suggestions that they make we already do anyway. As members will be aware, we're fairly advanced in our handling of gambling harms in Leeds. The other 2 are from the trade. The Betting and Gaming Council is a trade body that represents the gambling industry, and Talarius is an adult gaming centre company. They provide gaming machines in adult gaming centres. Their comments relate just broadly to the inclusion of suicide statistics, which they didn't understand why we included those. The updated gambling harm statistics, the recommendation that applicants could consider offering conditions to be imposed on their licence, and the reference to areas of deprivation being included when that isn't a licence consideration. So we've provided more information in the policy and revisited and updated some of the bulleted lists as per the responses from pages 97 to 102 in your pack. And a summary of the changes following the consultation is provided from page 109 onwards. The updated policy now follows the budget and policy framework. It was referred to scrutiny by the Chief Officer Elections and Regulatory under a delegated decision notice at the beginning of the summer, and it will be presented to Licensing Committee tomorrow for information. Any comments and recommendations scrutiny would like to make will be presented to Executive Board before it's referred to Council for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for the presentation and report. I will open to the, well, before I open to the board members, can I ask Councillor Cooper, Councillor Lewis, or let the discussion develop and then I'll bring you back in. Any question from the board members? Councillor Carlisle.
Sorry, this is probably a daft question, but why is this coming to today's meeting? Like, I'm also going to be in the licensing committee. I've got lots of questions, but I feel like they're mainly questions I should hold off till tomorrow. So is there a particular angle you want to explore today, and then perhaps a more detailed exploration of the licensing issues tomorrow?
So this report is taken to Licensing Committee tomorrow, but just for information. Strangely, under the Budget and Policy Framework, Licensing Committee don't get a say at this stage. So it's brought to scrutiny for comment. So by all means, bring those issues up today. That's fine, and I'm really happy to talk about them again tomorrow. The reason why it's gone this way round, it would normally go to Licensing Committee first, then scrutiny, then Exec Board, and then full Council. So it makes a more logical progression. It's just the timing of the meetings. It just happens to have gone the other way around.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Thanks. So it's nothing specific to do with this year's report, but a number of years back, Victoria Casino were fined, as you know, best part of £500,000 because of anti-money laundering and safer gambling breaches, mainly because of the Gambling Commission's failure, I think, to keep us informed about what was going on. And I think there was an element of maybe the casino could have told us locally as well. I just wondered what the relationship was now. And I know when I was on the licensing committee that this was taken up nationally. I just wondered if things had improved communication-wise since.
Between us and the Gambling Commission, or between us and Victoria Casino?
Will you say again?
Sorry, between us and the Gambling Commission, or between us and the casino? We wrote in fairly strong terms to the Gambling Commission at our disappointment that we hadn't been given any kind of information, not even post their investigation, and we were advised quite clearly that it was basically not of concern to us, which was very disappointing, and we have made our opinion very clear to the Gambling Commission on this matter. They see the breaches that happened were breaches to the operating licence and the licence conditions and codes of practice, and therefore not a matter for the local authority.
Thank you, Sue. Next, I've got Councillor Timmins.
Yeah, so I've gone through the policy. It's very comprehensive and detailed. I just want to pick up on training a little bit. So it does reference it throughout the policy. And where I've got concerns is actually bigger organisations that the sole business is gambling, casinos, bookies, stuff like that. They have quite a lot of training in place and safeguards. But where I feel we don't have that is in smaller places where, like, that might have fruit machines, which is another line of money coming through rather than the business. So it might be drink or it might be food that's the main business. And in terms of, could we be more robust in what we expect of them in terms of training? 'Cause it seems like there's quite a lot of suggestions, and potentially could we provide them or as part of this policy, links to websites that may offer free training, or whether we, as a licensing team, could put together some slides that could be shared for free with the smaller businesses.
The vast majority of gambling premises in Leeds are operated by the big companies. I don't believe we have any independent bookmakers now. The situation that you're talking about, fruit machines, you'd be talking about fruit machines that are in pubs.
Yeah, pubs and clubs.
Yeah, they're the only place now that you can have fruit machines. You're not allowed to cite them in places like taxi offices and takeaways and so on. So it's only premises that are authorised for the sale of alcohol. And we deal with those premises under the Licensing Act, which is the alcohol licensing legislation. We have an enforcement team of 4 that visit these premises very, very regularly, and we provide advice regarding the gaming machines as part of that process. We will discuss with the management the supervision of those machines, because that's something that is very important to us, and the ability for children to use those machines unsupervised. And so our recommendation always is in line of sight to the bar, that they're properly supervised and so on. There is more work being undertaken nationally around technology that can be used to help, like touchpads in front of the machine, so that bar staff are made aware that people are playing them and so on. That's all in development. With regard to training, then we do that through, as I say, through our regular visits with the licensed premises. And also, if we receive a complaint and have to undertake some enforcement action, all that kind of thing is tied up with the Licensing Act. Yeah, and we're very, very keen on it. So, absolutely. As to the requirement on the gambling operators, I think if we did it through the gambling policy, it would be directed towards the wrong people, and that's most definitely something that we should be dealing with under the Licensing Act.
Thank you, Sue. So I want to understand how has the previous work done by Environment, Housing and Communities Scrutiny Board been factored into the statement of licensing policy?
So Scrutiny Board will be aware that we looked at gambling harms much more in detail with Scrutiny Board at the beginning of last year. We take a whole council approach to gambling harms, and this is something that we work on very hard because of the issues that we have in Leeds. We're aware that we're a large metropolitan district, and we would have a larger than normal number of people who experience gambling harms. As a council, we have a cross-department team that works, as I say, we work very closely with public health and financial inclusion. And we have a Leeds gambling harms group, which is a much wider group. There's about 30, 40 bodies that sit on that, and we all work together. So we're working together with treatment service and advice services outside of the council, as well as all our internal partners as well. And we proceed with that work on a quarterly basis with a report back to licensing committee every year.
Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Carlisle and Councillor Kitchener after this.
Good morning. So yeah, I've got a few questions. I'm going to run the same risk that Councillor Cohen ran before. It's possible. I have read the whole comprehensive thing, but it's possible that you'll say it's in the report, and I'll just have to apologise at that point. Do we have... Yes, it'll make Councillor Cohen feel better if that is the case. Is there a slow switch to more and more online gambling and less like on street gambling? And so is that making our life easier, because presumably we don't have responsibility for policing online gambling? So that's question one. Do we do test visits into bookies, and in particular, or ask them to present evidence that they are turning away, say, vulnerable people or children? That was question two. Is there specific work related to that last one? Is there specific work around like kids gambling, like I noticed on page 46, it was something that was highlighted that kids with kind of experiencing suicidal thoughts name gambling as an issue. And finally, are we anticipating any change from national government, and are we making representations to them about what that might look like around the gambling industry? Thank you.
So first of all, the slow switch from land to online, yes we are. We now believe that it's about 50-50 between land-based gambling and online gambling, and that will progress. What we do know is that there is a link between land-based gambling and online gambling. For example, if you have a gambling app on your phone and you walk past a bookies, that company will ping you offers on your mobile phone. So we know that basically our land-based premises are a massive advertisement for the online offer. So they're still inextricably interlinked. And so we still have a lot of work to do regarding land-based gambling and gambling harm. We undertake a full inspection programme of all our licensed premises, and we have just undertaken a full inspection programme of our gambling premises. So yes, we are visiting bookies. They are required to keep records as part of their licence conditions and codes of practice under their operator's licence, which is controlled by the Gambling Commission. But because we look after all land-based gambling, we do the visits and we look at all of that information. So yes, there's a thorough inspection programme that goes on with all our gambling premises. Kids gambling, yes, it's a concern. We do the My School survey, and our financial inclusion team would be able to talk to you more about that. And we are aware that children do gamble, and they like bingo and so on. It's not just the in-game gambling that you can do on your mobile devices. But we're working through the cross-party group. We're working with education on providing training to teachers and parents around online gambling and gambling in general connected with children.
Thank you. So, Councillor Kitchener.
Hi. I don't know anything about licensing. I'm not a gambler, but the thing I get in my area of Morley, which is really just one street, Queen Street, and we're actually saturated with bookies and these where you go, do the one-armed bandits and what have you. Do you ever see, or do you ever envisage that there will come a day where you'll say, right, that's it, Morley's got enough? Because people have a go at we councillors and we say, it's not us, it's the landlord, you know what I mean? It's a grief that we get. And I just feel, we're getting shop, we get an empty shop coming, whoa, it's going to be a bookies. You can guarantee that. So do you ever envisage that there'll be a stage where they'll say, right, that's enough? Thank you.
So, two things. First of all, under the Gambling Act, there is written into the legislation that there is a clause that says that we must aim to permit gambling where it's consistent with a number of different things. That phrase makes it incredibly difficult for us to outright refuse gambling applications, new betting premises. However, under the white paper, the new changes that are coming to the Gambling Act, one thing that they are talking about is to bring in cumulative impact. We have it for alcohol, and they're talking about bringing it into gambling. Obviously, places like Morley, which I believe has 4 or 5 bookies on Queen Street. Yeah, in a very small. We did try to. The latest one, Boyle Sport, we did make representation to, but we weren't successful. But we would, places like that, places like Morley, that would definitely be a candidate for a cumulative impact assessment and a cumulative impact policy where we could say no more. So that so we've got community of impact coming, but yes, it's very, very difficult for us at the moment to just refuse because there's too many. Demand is something we're not allowed to take into consideration. That and the aim to make it very, very difficult for us.
So I understand what you're saying, but do we have any timing of when this might happen, please?
We were hoping to see it before the election, but it didn't go through in time. So it will be in the next. It'll be in the next. Cycle. That's the word. Thank you. Next cycle. Yeah.
Councillor Palmer.
Thanks very much for your presentation. My son worked in a bookies and he basically said he was like a part-time social worker. He makes sandwiches and teas for the regulars. I know it impacts on a lot of people. Yeah, it certainly impacted an old friend of mine who's died now, but he couldn't walk past somewhere, you know, if we were going out for the night, he'd have to go in and spend all his money there. I was going to say, like, I echo a lot of people. I don't gamble myself, but I obviously understand that if you are going to, it's better to do it regulated than unregulated, so this keeps everything above board. But I'm just losing my thread of thought then. I was going to say, what was I going to say? Sorry, I was going to ask you a question. Oh, yes. Do we have the resources at the council to engage with communities? Because I don't know if it's anecdotal, but you hear that certain communities in the city are more liable to gamble, and obviously people will keep things secret, I know, as much if they're in getting into difficulties. But I just wonder if there was any engagement in particular areas of the city with particular communities or not.
That's the purpose of the Leeds Gambling Harms Group, is that so that we can identify, raise awareness and to provide training. We are undertaking some training with all our frontline staff. Again, we've already done one round of that and we're doing some more. So yes, we do engage with the groups that we identify as being vulnerable. That's a very important part of our work, and we do that with financial inclusion, and public health. We work together with them on that. You're quite right. It's considered a wicked issue. People feel a huge amount of shame about having suffered from gambling harm, which if you bear in mind the highly addictive nature of gambling and the gambling products, it's a real shame. We have in the last 6-7 years managed to get the NHS gambling clinic sited in Leeds, and we've also now got GamCare's community gambling clinic in Leeds as well. So we've done well in Leeds. As I say, we're well developed in this area. We've been working a long time on this issue. Yes, we do work with vulnerable groups.
Thank you. Councillor Kitchener is the last speaker before I bring Councillor Lewis or Councillor Cooper for any comments.
Thank you. This might be a silly question to ask, but we have a lot of problem with vaping and young children being sold vapes at certain shops. Do they have to have a licence? Does that come under your, does that come under your wing kind of thing, please?
So vaping isn't part of our remit. However, vaping and the illegal vapes is something that we do get involved in, because quite often these are sold by alcohol licensed premises, and so we have been involved with the days of action that have been undertaken by Trading Standards, who are the body that look after that smoking and the illegal vapes and so on. Entertainment licence, the police, immigration, Trading Standards, HMRC have all been doing these massive days of action where they've been looking specifically for illegal vapes, non-duty paid tobacco, counterfeit alcohol. And where they found them in premises that are licensed for alcohol, then we've received reviews and we've reviewed those licenses.
Sorry to be a pain. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. But we have an amazing licensing guy in Morley area, and I have raised my concerns, what I am getting complaints about, and I've got to admit he has whether it should be or shouldn't be, is organising for somebody, a team to go in and be doing spot checks. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we're really lucky to have Councillor Coyne as chair for Children and Family Scrutiny Board here. And they've done quite a bit of work on this as well. And Rob just whispered in my ears. So I'll just do you want to update what work's been taking place in Children's Service?
Thank you, Chair. That's a nice way to start. Very lucky to have Councillor Cohen, I'll take that, even with my ridiculous questions earlier. I'm actually going to flag up because I actually also sit on West Yorkshire Joint Services for the Council, and it's quite great that West Yorkshire Joint Services undertake a number of random visits to premises to age test that retailers are, in fact, adhering to the various legal limits. To answer your specific question, there is no licensing around selling of vapes. Our scrutiny board was asked last year by Councillor Sandy Lay to, together with Councillor Scope's scrutiny board, look at whether we could develop a Leeds-based system to regularise the selling of vapes to young people. As you've identified, lots of the way vapes are designed are specifically designed to attract young people, albeit it's unlawful for them to purchase. So we've got a watching brief on that at the moment, because both the previous government and the current government have been very clear that they are intending to bring legislation that would make it unlawful, full stop. Now, exactly what that's going to look like, we aren't yet clear because we haven't seen the legislation, but our board is watching very closely together with Councillor Scopes and Councillor Sandy Lay regularly asks where we are on that. So it's something we're keeping a watching brief on, and I shall ensure that continues to be the case together with my colleagues on the board, and I know Councillor Scopes would say the same thing. And West Yorkshire Joint Services will obviously continue its function too. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Coyne. And now I'd like to bring Councillor Cooper for any other comments.
Thank you, Chair. And I would just like to, again, thank the team for undertaking this review. What we thought was going to be a light touch review has turned into a wholesale change of the licensing policy. And again, the team have done a remarkable job in bringing it forward in such a short amount of time. I would also just like to add that gambling harm can cause significant impact on individuals, on families and in communities. And I think we're really lucky in Leeds to have done the work that we've done over many years through the financial inclusion team and in partnership with public health and the NHS to bring about the first gambling clinic. Really was the one in Leeds in the Merion Centre, which was the first time that people would be able to visit a gambling clinic and get some support and some help. So we've been extremely lucky to have had all that work undertaken in the city previously, and I really hope that we can continue to be an outlier in that sense and continue the good work that we'd already started. Again, it's probably cross-scrutiny working as well through this item and this area of work through both children's, as Councillor Coyne's mentioned, around the vaping, and also through communities board as well in terms of the gambling as well. So just thank you to the team. Please pass on our thanks. I know you're a small team, but you've really done well in terms of getting this review together. So and thank you, Scrutiny Board members, for your comments.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper, and And I forgot to introduce Nicola is also present from licensing, and thank you, Nicola, for attending, but Sue's done all the answering all the questions on your behalf as well. Just want to thank Sue, Nicola and John for attending this morning for the Scrutiny Board. Thank you. And pass our thanks to your team as well, as Councillor Cooper said. So the recommendation on page 31, if we are happy with them, I will move to item number 10. So are we happy with the recommendation? Yep. Thank you. We now move to item 10, which is the Leeds Joint Strategy Assessment, which assesses current and future health and social care needs in Leeds, and will help us plan our priorities and how we spend our resources. It is really interesting report, and we have invited the scrutiny chairs to attend, and I will ask them to introduce themselves as well. A wide range of piece of work that could affect the board, and Councillor Scope can't attend this morning for this meeting, and Mike is also here to run through the presentation and introduce the report. Before I ask Mike to introduce the report, I'll ask the chairs to introduce themselves, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Hannah Bithell, and I chair the Infrastructure Investment and Inclusive Growth Strategy Board, Scrutiny Board. Thank you.
Hello again, everybody. Councillor Dan Cohen, now adopting my Children and Family Scrutiny Board chair hat.
Thank you. And now I'll hand over to Mike to go through the presentations.
Thanks very much, Chair. Morning, everyone. My name's Mike Eakins. I'm Head of Policy in the Strategy and Resources Directorate. So just to add to what the Chair said in introducing the item, really, this is a really broad-ranging piece of work which we undertake about every 3 years. It's a statutory piece of work that we do in partnership with between the Leeds City Council and the West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board. Its primary purpose is to underpin and be the evidence base really for the city's health and wellbeing strategy. But over a long period of time, for over 10 years in Leeds, we've taken a much broader approach that looks at the widest determinants of health and tries to make greater use of this piece of work to underpin our wider sort of strategies and the work that we do in the city and in the council. Bit of background is on the screen, but the one thing I really wanted to highlight is really thanks from myself and the team to all the people who've contributed to this piece of work. We're lucky to have been able to convene a sounding board to oversee the development of the JSA with partners from across the health and care system, from academia and from communities as well, who've contributed to making this, I think, hopefully quite an impactful piece of work, and continue to iteratively improve the process each time we do it. So this time, for example, we've got a little bit more qualitative information in there than we've had previously, and it's thanks to the input from colleagues. What I'm going to try and do in the next 10 or 15 minutes is give you a whistle-stop tour through some of the headlines of the JSA, which I probably will not do justice, but you've got the full report with you, and I'm happy to take questions. Just in terms of the structure of what I'll talk through and the report more generally, we take a life course approach to the JSA, so we look at the different stages of people's lives and try to pick out the key data analysis and information that is impacting life in Leeds at that stage. I'm going to talk through most of those life course stages that are on the screen here in brief terms this morning. The one I won't touch so much on is the ageing well and dying well, and that is a result of this time that the Director of Public Health's annual report focused on ageing well. So what we chose not to do was to duplicate that really, really detailed piece of work in the Joint Strategic Assessment. So if you actually glance at the document itself, you will see it's largely signposting to that excellent piece of work rather than redoing it. So to save a little bit of time, I've set that aside for the presentation today, but would encourage you to have a look at that if you're interested in that area. So I'll move quickly on, and some of these slides I'm going to move through very quickly just to try and give you a flavour. So you can see here the population of Leeds split by age, and you really just want to share you probably will already know, but that sort of skewing of the Leeds population towards the younger demographic on the right hand side is the national tree for that. And over the past 10 years, the population of Leeds has grown faster than regional and national averages. It's increased by about 8% since the 2011 census. And as part of that, the birth rate is something we track very, very closely. And you'll see, as people will be aware, we had a real, what we call the bulge cohort from sort of the late 2000s into the sort of not long before the pandemic, where we saw higher birth rates in the city, which since have been falling. So we think we're probably at about peak children and young people now in Leeds. We expect the number of children and young people to fall from this point, and that is largely as a result of the birth rate. And what we're now seeing is that bulge cohort start to work its way through secondary school, which does have implications then for service provision at post 16. And I'll touch a little bit on this later, but just to flag really in terms of what that means for the city, we are really aware of potential sort of how issues come together around educational attainment and the birth rate, because a number of those cohorts are in the bulge are the sort of COVID generations who have had their education impacted by the pandemic, and national research tells us that we're expecting about a 4% reduction in their educational attainment versus the cohorts that have come before and after. When we pair that potential risk around attainment with the higher numbers of children that are going to be entering post-16 and creating a natural squeeze, if you like, on that post-16 system, I know education leaders in the city are already thinking about how we manage that and improve provision of particularly possibly level 3 skills, which are those ones that really help people to go on into further education. The next two slides, I just want to look at the population of the city by age and by ethnicity against the indices of multiple deprivation. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, that sort of number 1, that represents the 10% most deprived communities nationally. And what you will see is the Leeds population generally is skewed towards those poorer IMD deciles. And particularly on age, we see the largest populations of both over 65s and children and young people in IMD1 in Leeds, and about a quarter of all adults and about a third of all children in the city live in those 10% most deprived communities nationally. If we turn to look at ethnicity, you see a similar picture. Diversity is increasing across the city, with the proportion of residents coming from an ethnically diverse background up from about 19% in 2011 to about 27% in 2021. But a real disproportionate number of those people are living again in that IMD1, where we see the highest proportion, about 41% of ethnically diverse people in Leeds live in IMD1, and conversely we see the smallest proportion living in IMD10, which is the wealthiest communities in the city. Just finally to stress that that population growth, therefore, that we see, that 8%, is really heavily concentrated on some of those inner city communities, which we see are often those where people are most likely to be struggling against poverty and inequality. And just finally on the population, something new that we looked at in the JSA this time was around the student population. So on the left was the census 2011 and the right census 21. And you'll see that the distribution of the student population has changed quite significantly. So it's about as dense in the traditional student areas, that inner northwest community, about as dense a population of students there as it has always been. What we have seen, though, is the spread of students to a broader area around the city centre and some of those inner city communities. And what I would just stress, though, when we look at particularly that inner northwest, I know if Councillor Venner were here, she would remind me to say that when we look at deprivation, often we can see the level of deprivation in some of those inner northwest communities being masked by the student population also being there. So that's something we need to be aware of. But the broader point here was that spread of the student population and really mindfulness about how we provide the services that students most often access going forward. Each section of the JSA concludes with a number of policy implications that try to pull out the real, I suppose, key takeaways. In the interest of time, I won't talk through these in detail, but I'm happy to take any questions at the end, and on screen are some of those key ones that will pick up the points that I'm bringing out, hopefully through the charts. Moving on to starting well, and first up is the level of children that we see living in poverty in Leeds, which is at about 22% at the moment. I do just want to stress here to be mindful of geography. So that, in terms of that broader spread there, Leeds, looks considerably lower than some of those other core cities, for example. However, we do need to bear in mind the geography of our city being very, very broad means that in the inner city communities, that 22% will not be a fair reflection of the true level of child poverty. And were we to have a tighter boundary like many other cities, we would likely see a much higher number. About 26% of children in Leeds are also claiming free school meals, so slightly above that figure. If we turn to look at the number, and I know you've already discussed a little bit this morning, that the children looked after. Since 2014, the overall number of children looked after in Leeds has fallen by about 2%, but we've seen about a 12% increase since 2021, which is higher than the regional and national averages. So we were coming from a low base, but we have seen a slightly sharper increase. Just so it's clear what you're looking at on screen, that all of those bluey, greeny ones are a number of core cities. So the two outliers, if you're interested, the 41% increase is in Liverpool and the 15% fall is in Manchester. We look in the JSA at a number of health issues affecting children and young people, but one of the things we really took a slightly deeper dive on this time was mental health. That was something we got feedback to look at in more detail. And essentially what you can see on screen is that the level of the number of children experiencing common mental health issues is steadily rising year on year. We did also look at this with a deprivation lens applied, so that the poorest and the wealthiest communities. And while we know from anecdotal evidence that often children in lower income communities are more likely to experience mental health challenges, that actually interestingly isn't reflected in the data in Leeds. We need to understand why that is. Largely probably suspect it's to do with the inequality in provision, and therefore picking up fewer of those cases. And certainly if you look at the more serious admissions data, it tells the opposite picture. So yeah, but something to be aware of and look at further going forward. It'd be remiss of me not to touch on educational attainment. So what we see in the city is that about essentially we on good level of development in the early years, we perform broadly comparably with other core cities, slightly below national and regional averages. About 46% of children who are eligible for free school meals achieve a good level of development by the age of 5. But that compares to about 68% of children who are not eligible for free school meals. So we do have quite a significant inequality gap in attainment, and that unfortunately follows children throughout their education. So if we turn to key stage 2 outcomes, about 36% of boys on free school meals are reaching the expected standards in reading, writing and maths, compared to 64% not on free school meals. The figures are very similar for girls, just slightly higher on both. And at key stage 4, similarly, the average attainment 8 score for children on free school meals is 34 compared to 50 for those not on free school meals. So we see that through a whole range of indicators that deprivation is affecting children's lives throughout the city, and a lot of the work that we're doing around child-friendly Leeds is really, and that mission is really targeted at these issues. So again, just some of the key takeaways, again, largely the themes that I've touched on already. Turning to health and well-being, there's a huge amount in the JSA. I've picked out 3 things to highlight today, but there's a whole bunch more in there. And members may be familiar with earlier versions, past versions of this chart, which looked at life expectancy in the city, a clear marker of the impact of poverty and inequality in Leeds. The gap in life expectancy that we see in the most recent analysis is very similar to what we've seen before, although the geography has shifted. So in Leeds, this could mean that a female living in Harewood can expect to live about 11.5 years longer than a female living in Hunslet and Riverside. They're the wards with the highest and lowest life expectancy. And we see a similar gap for men. It's slightly larger for men, but broadly similar. On mental health, again, this tells a similar story to what we saw with children, but this is looking at the all-age population, where we do see, particularly since about 2017, have seen quite a sharp rise in the number of people experiencing mental health illness. And again, if you can see here that it tells the story we might expect, which is that is again slightly higher in lower income communities than it is in wealthier communities. And finally, on cancer, I mean, thankfully, mortality rates from cancer are continuing to slowly fall across Leeds, but you can see there is a really significant inequality gap here between wealthier and poorer communities. And the one thing I really wanted to flag here is what you're looking at on screen is mortality. If I were to show you the chart for prevalence, i.e. the number of people we think are living with cancer in the city, it tells the complete opposite story, where we see the number of people living, well, the data shows the number of people living with cancer in lower income communities is a lot lower than in higher income communities. Now, we know that's not correct. The mortality data tells you that's not correct. But what is going on essentially is there is poorer access to healthcare, poorer diagnosis of people with cancer in lower income communities. And what we're essentially seeing more frequently is they're being diagnosed at stage 3 or stage 4, and then unfortunately ending up as a statistic on this graph, rather than being diagnosed at stage 1 or stage 2 and recovering. That's something we know is a challenge. Health and care leaders know that's a challenge, and there is an ongoing piece of work happening to look at how we can improve cancer detection rates in poorer communities. Excuse me, again, some of the key takeaways from the health and wellbeing section. I'm going to skip over that one because people will have seen it lots and lots of times before, which is the level of deprivation in the city, which will not be a surprise. We do quite a lot in there looking at the provision of services, both community services as well as council services, and a chart that some may have seen before on screen about the third sector in Leeds. So Leeds has one amongst the most organised and impactful voluntary and community sectors in the UK, but we have seen a decline in the number of organisations. Thank you. A decline in the number of organisations over the last couple of years. And the third sector strategy and the volunteering strategy are looking in more detail at the impact of that and how we can support the sector in the context that we are now operating in. And just finally, I think in this section, and I've got a couple more, crime, the really complex chart, so apologies for that. But the headlines here are the overall crime rate in Leeds in the last year has increased by about 8%. And I'm sure that's something members will probably be experiencing in what they're hearing on the ground in their communities. The highest increase has been seen in what we call acquisition crimes, so theft, robbery, and things like that, whilst violent crime, including possession of weapons, has also increased by about 11%. And some wider evidence that we've drawn on, conducted by the London School of Economics, found that a 10% rise in the cost of living equates broadly to an 8% rise in crime, which is roughly equivalent to what we've seen in Leeds. I just, before finishing this section, want to touch on housing and housing affordability. So Leeds has got a really, really positive story to tell on housing. In the year to March 2024, we delivered over 4,400 new homes, about 1.5% of all homes built in England. And if every council developed new housing at the pace that Leeds does, we wouldn't have a national housing crisis. However, affordability tells a slightly different story that we're really mindful of seeking to address. And that's what you can see on screen here. The red line on the screen is England and the dark blue line is Leeds. And what you're looking at is the lower quartile, so that the bottom 25% of housing in terms of price matched against the lowest 25% of earners. And it's essentially the gap between those two things. So you can see traditionally Leeds, housing in Leeds was for that 25% of people was broadly more affordable, consistently about the same amount more affordable than the national average. But more recently, that gap has closed, and in the latest data, they were only very slightly apart. So despite the delivery of very large amounts of new housing, for people on lower incomes, we are seeing housing get less affordable. And we really need to see what happens in the next few years on this chart. But based on that trajectory, we could see those lines cross over and essentially Leeds become less affordable than even the England average. And there's quite a big gap there between Leeds and some of our neighbouring authorities. So just something we're really watching quite closely and very mindful of. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip a couple of slides, but happy to share the pack with members. And on climate change, I'll just highlight this one thing really, which is around fuel poverty. So about 16% of households in Leeds are experiencing fuel poverty. That's defined by low income and low energy efficiency. And housing costs are about 2.3 times higher for the least energy efficient homes than the most. What we do see in Leeds, though, is quite consistently social housing is of a higher energy efficiency grade than other tenure types. And that's, you know, the work that the council and other agencies have done in the city has had a really big part of that. But it's something we're really aware of, and through schemes that we've got in the city to look at housing quality, particularly in the private rented sector, it's something that we continue to try and improve in the parts of the city where we know we've got a particular challenge. And then finally in this section, just looking at the level of usage of public transport. The data here is not brilliant and we haven't got a lot that we can draw on, but what you're looking at here is footfall at the station and purchases of M cards and bus tickets. And you can see on the left-hand side is sort of when the pandemic hit in March 2020. That's the level of public transport usage we were at that time. And we're still quite considerably lower than that. We still have not recovered to that pre-pandemic level, albeit, as you can see in the graph, there is a very steady and gentle rise in people using public transport in the city. So the recovery is happening, it's just happening very gradually and gently. And I think, Chair, I'll pause there if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for comprehensive presentation and for your report as well. Before I open to the board members, as usual, I'm going to ask if Councillor Cooper or Councillor Lewis want to add any comments on this before the discussion.
Thanks, Chair. I feel it's like one of those reports there's a lot of information in, so I hope everybody on the board's read it from start to end, and I'll be asking questions later. I mean, this report, as Mike said in his presentation, is comprehensive and really useful in terms of looking about the direction of the city over the next future years. It's coming to Executive Board on Wednesday as well, which where I'll be presenting it there. I think the one thing that I think is important to point out is, it is a great compendium of information on the city and a look about how the city is changing. I think the other thing as well is that the direction it's given us in terms of policies and schemes we've implemented as a council, and what weight we place on changes in the city and how it could affect them. So, from things like public health, recognising what direction that work needs to go. Some of the housing issues might refer to the need for selective licensing, which we have introduced in some areas in the city. In terms of the increasing densification of parts of the city, the need to have good public transport options, so more people can live in less areas and still be able to get around. So there's lots of areas where it does influence what we do as a council, and I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis, and I will open for questions or comments from the board members. Councillor Palmer.
Mike, many thanks for that report. Excellent. I just, in a lot of ways, I wish it was the only thing that was coming to the board, really, because it's so comprehensive. It's someone like me, it's absolutely fantastic and fascinating. I'll carry on reading it. Just a couple of things. I don't want to be critical at all, but when you mentioned crime, appreciate it's reported crime, I'm assuming. I mentioned that because I represent Armley, and there are pockets of Armley that I've been told by the police and ASB teams that are just not reporting crime. So there is obviously a distortion there. Secondly, it's something you touched on earlier yourself about the spread of the city, the actual geographical size. And before this report, we were talking about the state of the finances of the city. So obviously, when we're comparing the core cities and we're looking for future funding from central government, maybe those parties that we are actually, and you know, in our inner city, maybe within the inner ring road, is really what they should be comparing us with Nottingham and Liverpool. So, but many thanks for the report. Brilliant.
Mike, do you want to respond back?
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, it absolutely is reported crime. So take all the caveats that you stressed in terms of there are parts of the city and particular crimes that we know are underreported, which aren't reflected in the report. And on your latter point, you're absolutely right, and it's something we often struggle with in terms of we are different to many of those other core cities. Just to reassure, we've just recently, after a recent discussion with elected members, kicked off a piece of work around working with colleagues in city development to see what we can do to really overlay the city geographies of some of those other core cities with Leeds to essentially create a sort of quasi new Leeds boundary that helps us to tell that story of a more traditional city boundary were that to apply here.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Carlisle.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, three questions. One of them was around schools. So I'm conscious that must have been about a generation ago, because of a drop in birth rates, a whole load of schools were then closed, or not mothballed, were closed, and then there's been a real squeeze on spaces. So this might be a question for another board like Councillor Cohen's, but I'm just interested to know how we're progressing with a strategy for that. The next bit, we might need to scrub this from the recording because there's a danger that we're going to offer some praise to Manchester, which is not what we want. But I just noticed that their productivity is really much better than ours, and I'm interested to know how they're doing that. And also, unless I missed it, have they seen a massive drop in children who are looked after? And if so, they seem like a real outlier. I'm just really interested to know how they're doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Can I bring Councillor Lewis before Mike answers?
Thanks. I think in terms of children looked after, you know, Manchester copied us as you know, a lot of places that want to aspire to be as good as Leeds do in terms of our child-friendly Leeds approach of looking at how, in terms of looking about how can a council work with families and communities to reduce the number of children in care and look at options like kinship care and things like that. So I think that is something that, like I say, it is something that Manchester have followed us on. I think I'm happy to be corrected by Mike, but I think the productivity isn't for the city of Manchester; it's for the wider it's for the wider area that. You know, includes some includes a wider geography, and I think that's often important to understand. But again, when I sort of referred earlier to when I referred earlier to using information that comes in this to look at how we what we need to do in the future is identifying those areas where we can see good examples of other places. There are good examples of things in Manchester, and looking about how we can improve what we do, and I think that's an important part of this process.
Thanks. Just to add to what Councillor Lewis has said on that productivity point, I suppose where our thinking at on that is it means Leeds has got a really strong pitch to the new government in terms of what they've set out as their objectives. We've got really low unemployment, really high employment rate, and we're sort of primed and ready. Really, if you can put some of those targeted investments in Leeds that will help us to increase that productivity, we're really ready to go with a massive potential win in terms of economic growth for the government. So that's really probably the proposition that we're now shaping up, and the regular themes around transport investment, investment in skills are really the things that will help us to move that in the right direction. On your first point around school places and school planning, I have to confess that is slightly outside of my my remit and knowledge, but happy to take that away and reflect that with colleagues and get an update for the board if needed.
Thank you. Marianne, do you want to come back?
Yeah, maybe just come in on a few of those bits and pieces. Like, for example, Councillor Parham, the reason we were keen to invite scrutiny chairs to this was, like, for example, to have a deeper dive into, say, for the crime aspects, but through the appropriate board. Like on productivity, it's maybe something that the Inclusive Growth Board would want to have a look at. In terms of schools and the schools growth programme that we had, that is in a very different place now, and the team are being quite resourceful in terms of how we might be able to use accommodation that is no longer needed, and deal with those issues. And again, that's probably something that Councillor Cohen's board have already, and will be looking at on their work programme as well. We were really keen that this did directly influence Scrutiny Board work programmes for the next couple of years, really, because it is such a substantive piece of work.
Thank you. Councillor Timmins.
Hiya, thank you for coming along today, and just to echo what Councillor Parham said, we could have almost had a full meeting on this. There's so much included in it. In the slides, which we did get sent out previously, it does say, it says people living with lower income communities on average spend more years in poorer health. And reading the report, going through the slides that you've gone through, it doesn't surprise me, but it is quite stark, the difference between more affluent areas and areas of deprivation. But these health issues don't just come about in your 50s. It's a result of your childhood, lessons learned that you then take into older life, and then the choices that you make then. The fact is, people find it more expensive to live healthier lifestyles. Me and my wife have just gone on a health kick the last few months, and our shopping bill has gone up so much, even though we're buying less sweet stuff, less fizzy drinks, we're trying to eat healthier, and, but it's a significant difference. And then also in terms of encouraging people to live more active lifestyles, we've got our sons signed up to swimming and gymnastics at the fantastic Kirkstall Leisure Centre, and got him playing football as well, and it all costs money. I remember as a kid raiding my stepdad's copper jar to get £1 for my football subs, and I'm conscious that people in more deprived areas, parents might not be able to set up these direct debits to get the kids in that. And so I suppose my question is, what can we do to make living healthier more affordable? So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a classic one for Councillor Scopes' Scrutiny Board, who already have done, I think, quite a lot of work on that in terms of existing work programmes and going forward. And I guess that's why at the heart of the Best City Ambition, as you saw earlier in the year, tackling poverty and inequality is still there, because we haven't cracked it. And, each time our JSA tells us that, I mean, what we'd hope is it's got less worse than it would have done without all the interventions that we are doing. And a lot of the, the pricing strategies and things, for example, in Active Leeds are targeted to try and remove some of those barriers. And obviously some of the public health stuff, it is national government rather than local government. But I guess, food banks and, some of the public health messaging locally tries to target some of those interventions. So again, we probably can't give a definitive answer today here, but that's exactly the kind of thing that it would be good for a scrutiny board to pick up.
Thank you, Marianne. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up on that. In the more deprived areas, do we have things in place to kind of educate people on living healthier lifestyles and how they can do that in a more affordable way?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of work through community hubs in particular and children's centres in particular where, you know, that information is targeted and there is probably, you know, more groups available to access. And a lot of the work that ward members do in those deprived wards is probably, you know, more prolific than perhaps in some of the other areas. But again, it's very difficult to reach. Councillor Lewis probably got.
Thank you. To sort of add to what Mariana said, I think there's a few things. I think, first of all, the point that was made earlier is deprived individuals and families are different from areas where there's lots of deprived individuals and families living. So I think it's important to understand that people can still live with a lower income in an area where not everybody else is living with a lower income. And I think that's important to understand when we're particularly talking about people's individual individual life outcomes. I think that on the broader point, you know, the work we've done as a city, we were one of the few cities to reduce childhood obesity. I think it was us and somewhere in the Netherlands were the only cities that were able to do that. And I think that reflects the working we've done through Children's and Families. Children and Families obviously do a lot more work than Children in Care, through Children and Families, through Public Health, through continuing to have such a strong network of sports centres and the work we've done around that. And also a lot of the work that's happened in individual communities. I mean, I'm sure people have got examples of kids football and sports teams who run on basically a subless basis, where the kids just turn up and play. They don't have to, you know, the funding that, like you're saying, Councillor Tim, is, you know, finding 50p for subs doesn't exist. So there's a huge amount of work. But I do think, like I say, in terms of some of the outcomes on the bigger pictures, we have demonstrated that success in Leeds, and we have shown that things like the child-friendly Leeds, bringing forward like the voice and influence of families. There's work that Active Leeds have done with Public Health on effectively prescribing sports sessions at sports centres, as well that we've done in the past. And again, unlike some private facilities, our sports centres still accept cash and still accept and you can still pay for single sessions. You don't need to buy a multiple ticket or a membership. So there's lots of areas I think we have been able to use our services and assets and come together to do that. And I think that's, like I say, some of the statistics in here are stark, and it comes back to the point made earlier about just when you look at the sheer scale of the geography of Leeds, some of the contrasts that may not be seen in other areas where it's quite tightly drawn round and an urban area are really stark. But like I said, I don't think that's, you know, we should sort of give up hope in terms of some of the good work we have. We have been able to do. As it says elsewhere in the report, you know, we've got a really strong, vibrant third sector that supports a lot of this, supports a lot of the work as well for helping people with activities. I know Andy, Councillor Parnham will know Sir John Battle leads his walking groups in West Leeds and things like that. To sort of, you know, that's an initiative that springs to mind. Seeing Councillor Parnham here around actually just helping people on a very practical level. We get some support from the Coalfield Regeneration Trust in our area around providing that activity. So there's a lot that happens, but I think the statistics in here really do sort of bear out the challenge we face and actually how people's individual health and life outcomes can be really affected.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I've got Councillor Flynn and Councillor Thompson then.
Thank you, Asgar. Thanks very much indeed for the presentation, Mike. It's a comment rather than questions, Asgar. I suppose the important sort of issue is what we do with the JSA next. Key, really, I think, to everything we do. Pretty fundamental to addressing the mortality and morbidity inequalities across the city, which don't seem to be improving much. It's come to us today, I think, to help shape the future work programmes of all the scrutiny boards. So it's good to see several of the scrutiny board chairs here today. And I suppose what I'd like to see is this as a standing item on all future scrutiny boards and committees in Leeds, and also on the WICA, similar boards and all the rest of it, because there's a huge amount of work still to be done. This is only sort of headline sort of issues, and we really need to get down to the nitty-gritty. So having it on all of these committee agendas in future as a standing item, I think, is essential. Thank you.
Mike, where will this go next?
I mean, the big thing for this is, you know, it goes a lot to inform, you know, our financial planning, but crucially, a lot of this is about commissioning activity, because as Mike said, the primary focus of the statutory requirement for a JSNA is around your health and wellbeing strategy. We happen to do it on a broader basis, which I believe is the right thing to do, and it will have a broader ramification, but the primary focus will be into commissioning activity between the health service and ourselves. So that's where you'd see more tangible things happening. But I think we are absolutely keen to keep it in the topic of conversation. I'm not sure whether it, you know, every meeting is quite right, but we can take away and have some discussions about the best approach to deal with it.
Thank you, Mariana. Next, I've got Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation on the incredibly detailed report. I've gone through as much as I can, but there's lots still to digest. So, if I may, I'll be as quick as I can. A few observations and questions on two distinct themes. So, firstly, on the 14 to 9, well, not just the 14 to 19s, but the impact of the drop in primary schools. I know there's a lot of discussion around that, and that's really hit our ward hard in terms of the places. I'm aware that Sufficiency are working on it. But then that bulge coming through and the need for a West Yorkshire approach. I know it's something we discussed at Employment and Skills last year at the WICA committee, because you've got people crossing boundaries. I mean, we're in Guiseley, so some go to Bradford for college, some go to Skipton, but also we know lots come into Leeds. So there's a massive demand. And I know it's something that the 14 to 19 strategic partnership will be discussing later this week, which I'll be wearing one of my deputy hats at. Wearing the other deputy hat in terms of activity, but also, so it's really good to see children's activity on the rise, really good to see investment in leisure centres. I mean, Edinburgh, we're seeing the gym expanded because it's got the biggest youth and student membership in the city, brings in money, keeps teenagers off the streets, keeps them active. I think it was Rotterdam that was the other city that had similar impact on child obesity, and it's good to see that come back up post-pandemic, and the work of the Henry programmes and others in children's centres that really make a massive difference. But then looping back earlier to the best start in life, wearing my former breastfeeding counsellor hat, really discouraged to see breastfeeding levels dropping yet again. This is something we've been talking about for decades. Bosom buddies are great, but if the help isn't there in the hospital in the early days, you're stuck. So keen to see work on that. Clearly that's another scrutiny board's work, but I'll be keen to see how that goes. But then that has an impact on child obesity, and then on later life. So the last one on cancer mortality and screening, also keen to see as somebody with lived experience who was fortunately diagnosed at stage 0, but aware that for many people that's not the case, how we can grow the push on screening and access to screening for lots of different groups who find it difficult. And also really pleased to see that there's some really focused work on the Jewish community who are affected particularly by genes that impact breast, prostate and other cancers, and access for families where there's a Jewish grandparent or other across Leeds and beyond. Sorry, that was a lot, but thank you.
Yes, Mike, you want to come back?
Thanks. Just in response to that, and also on the previous question about next steps, just to stress as well that we had a really, really fruitful, positive discussion at the Health and Wellbeing Board where a whole range of issues that are flagged, some of which we knew about, some of which were perhaps newer, that had come through the JSA, have been picked up by the Health and Wellbeing Board and that health and care system, thinking about the system response to that. So I've touched on cancer, you've touched on breastfeeding. There are a number of other things that came up in the Health and Wellbeing Board discussion as well. So just to stress, that is now part of those next steps conversations.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. One very specific point, one broader point. So, I mean, just in terms of the falling number of children and school places moving forward, I mean, the challenge we have, and my ward's one of those that has a falling population. You know, we talk about a growing city and growing population, but actually parts of my ward have a falling population. I think that reflects the fact, again, that in Leeds you can always have a bit of everything. Maybe we should put that on the welcome to Leeds signs. But one of the particular challenges around the organisation of schools is given sort of the landscape of free schools and academies is people think the council is responsible for planning school places, and it isn't, because we don't have that direct responsibility now around where schools are opened, where schools are opened and closed. So I think it is one for continuing sort of, again, the really strong work that the education and learning side of children and families have had with the relationship with schools, that we don't, we don't directly. It's not like when I went to school and the council logo was right on the front of every school in the city. But we do have that relationship. It can be, as you know, Councillor Thompson, it can be difficult when there are issues around that. On the bigger point, I think it's on the bigger point where to go with this. We have our Marianne touched, we have our budget which we set every year. We have our strategic plan for the city, and I think it's having this really strong evidence base that we've had opportunities like this to interrogate, and through the other scrutiny boards to make sure we are being clear and rational in what we do. I know if you look at Facebook, not every resident of Leeds believes the council is a rational organisation, but trying to have that information to support the decision makings and the policies we're making is really important, and it sort of goes through all the work that we do, and all the different services the council have to try and get the outcomes we want that set out in the best city plan.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis, and I've got 4 people on the list. Councillor Bithell and Councillor Hinchcliffe, then Councillor Chapman and Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks for inviting me and the other scrutiny chairs to come along. It's really good to hear the members of the board make all the comments. I've tried to mainly stick to things that are relevant just to my scrutiny board, but I could have played with this report for hours. So the first 2 questions are around that sort of economic inactivity and unemployment work, and I noticed the bit about the hollowing out of the labour market and requiring higher skills, and I just wondered how much work we've done to ensure that our employment support policies and our employment hubs are actively engaging on fulfilling those skills gaps, as opposed to just the skill gap of being able to access the CV, the interview and such like. And are we supporting our industry through anchor networks, etc., to use tech to make roles more accessible so that there's less long-term economic inactivity? Because that's spiked a lot, specifically through ill health. I was interested in the food insecurity. This is where I got sidetracked from my own scrutiny board. It felt very narrow in the written response, in terms of it being very much focused on the affordability of food, and food insecurity covers both affordability and nutritiousness. And it would have been good, I think, to see in there a little bit more about fuel poverty and the impact that has on the food you can actually create to eat, even from food banks and things. And then also time poverty, and how many families, because they're working several jobs or have care responsibilities, actually are given a couple of quid so they can go and get chicken and chips, because actually there is no time and capacity for anything else. The other thing was around bungalows. There's a lot of bungalows needed, identified 9,000, I think it was in the report. And I just wondered how much work we're doing on working out what different sized bungalows we need. We talk about the care needs. Miriam Margoyles from, she was in Harry Potter, quite famously, have I pronounced it wrong? Margolis, okay, thank you. She was quite famously now lives with a couple of younger people in order that they can assist her. But obviously if we have a thrust on bungalows with a 1-bedroom property, then obviously we're losing opportunities for that. So I wondered whether we've done any work around that. The community resilience section talked about COVID and how in COVID, all of these community organisations showed massive resilience, which was amazing. And my ward was no different. I was astounded by the work that they did. But what the report didn't seem to capture was, it felt like it was almost saying we need to minimise the top down and focus on this community resilience. And actually, although that's true, there was a huge, during COVID, amount of top-down stuff that was there to support. And I don't think that element of the warehouses, the food sharing stuff that was going on needs to be understated. And the funds and the volunteers being off work that meant that we got higher skills, everyone had more time, or a lot of people had more time, I didn't have more time. And it felt like that was missed. And then two comments that don't require a response, but it would be good to minute them, is I really loved the paragraph about not using dehumanising language. We can so often fall into that, and having that explanation in the report was great. And then, as obesity champion, I just would like it minuted just how little impact there's been on obesity in the report, and with the removal of funded programmes, it's likely to get worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bithell. Mike, do you want to respond to that, please?
I'll do my best. Some of this is, I think, will have to be, we'll go away and have a look, or feed your comments in to what that is being done. So, on the labour market, the hollowing out the skills gaps, that is absolutely something we've been aware of for some time, and the future talent plan that was produced, I think just after the new inclusive growth strategy a couple of years ago, goes quite heavy on that issue, and that's something that is regularly discussed in terms of our relationship with the Combined Authority and how we target a range of that support, both at the business side, but also the support that's available to learners in the city through the education budget and other funding and programmes that are available. So yeah, that's absolutely a sort of known issue, and there is ongoing work targeted at that. Colleagues in the economic policy team will be able to give you much more detail on how that breaks down than I'm able to here today. I don't have an answer for you, I suppose, on the tech to make employment more accessible, but that's something I'm happy to take away and feed into colleagues. I'm sure it probably is something that we're looking at, but I don't have the detail here. On food insecurity, you're absolutely right that we've told, if you like, half of the story in the JSA. And that point around diets, we hint at as being important, but we don't really go into. That's probably one of the flaws of a product like this. And I always say, when we're looking at data products, data's useless without context, and it's important to make those points that you have done. What we don't have is data sources we can draw on. So much for that nutritious diet side of the story of what's happening in people's lives, and that's why it's not here in the level of detail it probably ideally would be. What I would say is, in terms of what we do with all of this data has already been picked up by colleagues in the Communities Directorate and third sector colleagues around the food partnerships that we have in the city. They are looking at that, and they are probably the colleagues that will take this away, unpack that picture in more detail, and have that, I suppose, fuller contextual understanding of what we might do going forward. But the points you raise are absolutely correct. I'll have to again on housing. So we touch in some detail on the gaps, but it is particularly around those smaller properties that we see. So although we're delivering large amounts of housing, we're probably not hitting the 1 and 2 bed numbers that ideally we would in the city. Again, this is something planning and housing colleagues have been aware of for some time. There are a range of challenges that they're better placed than I am to touch on as to why that is the case. And then just finally, I absolutely take the feedback on the third sector points that you raised. So yeah, we work quite closely with third sector colleagues, infrastructure colleagues, on what went into this report to give a fair reflection of what they're currently feeling on the ground, if you like. And that's why this took the, I suppose, lens that it did in terms of what's happening at that community level and that bottom-up approach. But you're right, there is absolutely a place and a value, and we saw it through the pandemic, of things that are more, I suppose, centrally coordinated, either ourselves and or alongside those infrastructure bodies that the third sector has. And that work absolutely is all continuing. It just wasn't so much the focus of the discussions we had in producing this report with the third sector. And I thank you for the comment on language. It's something I feel personally quite passionate about. And with something like this, where we're talking about indices of deprivation and we're banging on about being deprived, it's so easy to slip into that sort of language, which we know from work that the council's done with organisations like Leeds Poverty Truth Commission. It doesn't play well with the people we're actually talking about. So sometimes we can't get away from it in an analytical product like this, but I think it's important to remind ourselves why we're speaking like that and the way that we would rather talk about people and their lives and their experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Can I remind members, please, brief comments and more questions, please. Councillor Hinchley, please.
I'll be very brief. Thank you very much. There is something for everyone in this report, and I think as members it's really useful to learn more about where we represent. Just welcome the MMR vaccination, but just one quick question. I will be quick. The map, does that suggest that take-up of vaccination is different within wards, so it's really hard to replicate into a kind of comprehensive list? And was there a reason that vaping prevalence was omitted?
Really quickly, yeah, you're absolutely right on the first point. That is the reason why. And we did look for data on vaping, but we couldn't find anything consistent or reliable beyond sort of general narrative, which is why it's not in the report. Hopefully, when this is done again in 3 years, give us a slightly newer issue, there may be something stronger to draw on.
Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the report. It's fascinating. It's really interesting to read and lots more to read. I just wanted to go into the community resilience bit briefly, and I will be brief. It would be really good, I'll say less, really good to have this section of the report incorporated into the community committee review and what we're doing to get our communities more engaged. I think the quote on page 188 is brilliant, where it says Leeds could do far more to build the communities back. Without a real community spirit, people won't look to improve or protect it. I think that's what, you weren't here for the early debate, but that was the sort of issue I was trying to get back to. And to go to a specific question, we talk about asset-based approach to community development. Are our officers and the departments trained in ABCD? So can we bring in service? It works in sort of health and children's, but what about things like asset management or in parks, so that when they're making decisions, we are looking at local assets and people about what they want to see and how to make that happen, not just what asset management or parks officers want to do.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Mike?
Thanks, Chair. I'll try to be quick. So on asset-based community development, I think often people call it slightly different things in their different professional disciplines, but the principles I think are pretty broadly understood within the council and are absolutely part of the Best City ambition. Really specifically, there is a refreshed new training offer that's just rolling out at the moment, actually, for officer colleagues across the council in ABCD, delivered by some of those really experienced practitioners that we have, and I think there's a member offer as well at the moment. So it's something we're continuing to push on. And on the Thriving Communities section, yeah, communities colleagues have got that, but I'll absolutely make sure it is flagged with that specific community committee review in mind following this board.
Thank you, Mike.
The ABCD training, is that compulsory or is it something they can choose to do?
No, it's not compulsory. I believe it's an offer that's made to staff.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your report. I'm just looking at the content of the report, and I don't see anything in there to do with culture diversity, and also maternity, because there's a lot of concern regarding culture diversity within maternity. There's been lots of issues and raised, and I've noticed nothing's been covered in here with regards to culture and diversity and maternity. So, because this is to say what we would like to be looked at, and I would like those to be included. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Mike or Mariana, do you want to pick this briefly?
I think in terms of the broader EDI point and the diversity, I would say it's kind of webbed right the way through, just because of the nature of the product. If that doesn't come out clearly, you know, we take that feedback, but that was the intention, rather than having a separate section on it, because it's so important to everything. I don't know about the maternity thing. I do know there is a requirement for NHS to do a specific maternity needs assessment, the same as there is, you have to do a housing needs assessment, as you know, that complements this broader brush project. So that might be where some of that detail will get picked up more.
I know you say that it's supposed to be, the EDI is all the way through. It's not, I cannot identify any of it in this report. And when you talk about the maternity, there's lots of issues with regards to cultural diversity, concerns that women are raising regarding maternity, Black, Asian, Pakistani, etc. And, you know, I can't see any of that throughout this report, even though the report is brilliant and it's for everyone in Leeds, but when it comes to culture, we cannot see it. And I'm not just talking about Black, you know, I'm talking about Asians and everybody else. We don't recognize ourselves in these reports.
Mariana?
That might be a specific one again for Councillor Scopes' board to kind of pick up, given their health remit, rather than us pick it up here. But we'll take the feedback about the broader piece of work for future.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Councillor Hamilton, and I'm sure we will take this away and make sure we keep it on our agenda as well. Councillor Coyne, last not but least.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invite today, because it is really helpful on a number of streams. On the one hand, it's confirmation that some of the work streams that we're picking up within children and family fit into that wider city piece, because scrutiny is one part of a jigsaw, and so that is reassuring. It's also both reassuring and concerning that we are picking up across the piece this pressure on spaces that are coming through the system in further education for non-A-level level 3 qualifications. It's something that is a real challenge for the city, and is going to be an increasing challenge in the coming years. I think there was a danger if you listen to Councillor Lewis just before, saying that the council doesn't have responsibility for school places. That's accurate. We don't have the levers to control those, but as a council we retain the statutory duty to ensure we have sufficiency. So we've got that real mismatch, actually, in that we've got the statutory responsibility, but we actually have none of the levers, or very few of the levers, to actually deliver those places. And that's something I've personally criticised for some time, on how because it stresses the need, and actually Leeds are very good at this, at partnership working, how we work with this mixed economy of providers, where we are but one of them. That's going to be really important in terms of primary schools, where we can see there is a fall. In fact, there's a really interesting report that the London councils have produced that actually address this exact issue, because population ebbs and flows. I think it was Councillor Thompson made the point before, or someone made the point before, that years ago we closed a number of schools only to need to open them again years later. So it's how we use those places when in years to come we may need spaces. So there are a number of, I think, really important things that the report brings out that's helpful, that scrutiny chairs were here to inform our work programme. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coyne, for those comments. And just one question from myself, actually. How will the stronger online intelligence platform develop? Will it be LCC resources that leads on it, or will it be Integrated Care Board also contribute to?
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, all of the above. The aim really is to do this without generating the need for any additional resource. So it's really a recognition that there's tons of data and analysis that already happens and some brilliant products that gets produced. That where we fall down is we're not always brilliant at making those available. Some of them can't be available in the public domain, but quite a lot could. So the piece of work we've committed with Health and Wellbeing Board to do is to really reform the Leeds Observatory with the looking really to get everybody to use that as the place that they will make their products available. So we improve access to that brilliant work that already happens. So it's not extra, it's just better access to what exists.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Mariana, for responding to those questions and comments. Before I approve the recommendation, can I, does Councillor Lewis or Councillor Cooper want to add any comments on this? Final comments?
Sum that all up. No, just thanks to the board for their consideration. I think it's, as members said, we could have spent all day on looking at this stuff, and I do think the important thing is, I think, and again we've touched on it, is it's not that this report, it comes here, it comes to Executive Board on Wednesday and then disappears. It's about how it informs our work going forward, Chair.
Thank you. Are we happy to approve the recommendation on page 117? Yep. Thank you. And can I thank the guests for coming this morning to our scrutiny board, chairs, and also Councillor Lewis and Councillor Cooper. I know you've got very, very busy diary as well. I just want to say thank you. I hope you have a lovely day. And once again, I hope, Councillor Lewis, you have a lovely day. Happy birthday as well. What a day to spend, your birthday. Okay. Yeah. That brings me to the work programme agenda now, and I'll hand it over to Rob to introduce this report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will be brief, conscious of the time. So this item presents the work programme for the board for the 2024-25 municipal year. Appendix 1 provides the draft work programme for members to make comment on, and then Appendix 2 is the latest exec board report. I think the only couple of things to note, and Councillor Khan did it a bit in the meeting, is the all scrutiny budget briefing that's planned for the 25th of September, 4:30, and that is a remote meeting which hopefully would make it more accessible to members. And then the affordable housing working groups that we mentioned in the pre-meet, I will obviously provide more detail on those. And then lastly, Chair, there is a work programme item to schedule linked to Councillor Timmins' comments around the changes to pay dates. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on this agenda? No? Okay, that brings me to the end of today's business. Thank you for your attendance and contribution today. Our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, 14th of October, 2024 at 10:30, with the usual pre-meeting at 10 o'clock. And thank you for attending. Thank you. Have a lovely day. Bye.